This works. Don't worry. This is going to be amazing. I'm Greg Bauch. I am the content production manager here at Mongoose. This is Mike Kochczynski. He is going to introduce himself because he's standing right here.
Yes, I am a client success lead and partner manager.
All right. And Mike did not sleep last night. That's how excited he gets about legalities. Mike?
I was, a man can dream, but every now and then we ascend to heights where we can talk about TCPA compliance on a near daily basis. So I'm very excited to be here.
We're inviting you to turn on your video again, just to make sure this is more of a community. Please keep your mic muted unless you're prompted to do so. Even if Mike tells a really funny joke and you want to laugh. So do that. If you are here, it's because you're texting students and it's super effective. But if you're here, you also want your school to be compliant, and kudos to you because compliance is awesome. We love compliance at Mongoose, Mike.
We do. And it's important to remember, this is not my cousin Vinny. We're not pretending to be attorneys here. Talk to your institution's general counsel. We're going to be speaking about the TCPA federal level. There might be rules in your country, because I know I saw some folks from Canada. There might be rules in your particular state, your region, that potentially supersede that. So make sure you're talking to the powers that be at your institution.
It's gathering consent. It's opt-out language. There's so many things involved in legalities. So you're probably wondering, dear audience, where do we start? Mike, where do they start?
Well, it starts with having a way to capture consent. What most institutions do is what's called express consent. So that is an individual putting their name and their mobile number on some type of form somewhere. In most cases, that is a application into the institution. That might be a request for information, an inquiry card, things like that. For the folks in the advancement world that might be on here, that could be potentially even verbally an alumnus saying, sure, send me a link so I can complete my gift that way over the phone. Some institutions will go above and beyond and obtain express written consent, which we'll talk about in a second, but that's where it starts. And then capturing that information somewhere, that might be a spreadsheet, that might be Banner or another information system, might be a CRM. But I'd recommend starting there.
Hi, Bucks County, PA. Thank you to everyone for joining us and chiming in on the video screen. Again, it's community, your questions. Throw them in the chat. Jessica's going to be monitoring. And of course, we'll have a Q&A after our presentation as well. Mike, I like to call this the acronym discussion because when it comes to legalities and texting, it's all about the acronyms.
Mm-hmm. So the main acronym is the TCPA, Telephone Consumer Protection Act, signed into law in 1991. It was written to prevent the scourge of robocalls. And obviously it succeeded because, no one gets robocalls anymore.
But what about if my car warranty is expired? How am I going to find out?
There might be other ways, yeah. But it was written into law. And ever since it was written into law, it was written for technology in the 80s and early 90s. And so the FCC as a regulatory body through statutes and case law have kind of provided a patchwork for telling us what is compliant behavior and not in the TCPA.
So texting is legal. It's legal to text students.
Absolutely.
So that means if you have a texting feature, texting platform, a phone, you should just start texting all willy-nilly and fire straight from the hip, correct?
You should not. You should obtain some type of consent. So again,
I knew he was going to say no because we talked about this before.
But also, I'm a big believer that if you're going to send any type of engagement, but especially texting where you're reaching somebody's personal phone, mine's apparently invisible, what you're doing is you want to make sure that communication would be beneficial to somebody, that's not spammy to them, right? So if you're going to text the student body, it should be about missing registration or about missing a particular deadline in an application, about an event that maybe people qualify for. It shouldn't just be blasted out to everybody.
So, and technology is just always advancing. We're a technology company, so hopefully we're helping further that cause. Because technology is always advancing, there's the need for best practices in that to keep up. Therefore, this might not be your first Mongoose webinar. This might not be the first time you've come to a legalities of texting webinar for Mongoose, but we're glad you're here, Mike, because things are just always kind of changing from year to year when it comes to compliance, legalities, and best practices.
Well, it's interesting. In terms of the statutes, the regulatory environment, the case law, not much has really changed. There was a Supreme Court case in 2021, cleared the way between two basically differing opinions in different circuit courts on what was considered an auto dialer, and now we're getting super granular into the weeds. But in 2022, what is really changing, what we're seeing is different behavior by the cell phone providers. So the group, the industry organization is called the CTIA, Cellular Telecommunications Industry Association. There's 100 plus mobile carriers in the United States. Most people in America have at least 3 to pick from in their individual area. And the enforcement of best practices and language has certainly increased. We've seen institutions send texts that, for whatever reason, are getting flagged by the carriers. One of the nice things about working with Mongoose is we can see that in macro and aggregate. So we can see behaviors that are good and bad. We can see things that get flagged and not flagged. But we're definitely seeing an increase in the carriers filtering out messages more than they used to.
Obviously, Mike and I work for Mongoose, so we love Mongoose. And the people we work with to support the client success. Schools have a benefit of working with Mongoose in that we're kind of obsessed with things like best practice. So your school is texting, you might be doing great. You should be keeping up on compliance. If you're in this discussion, you are, that's a good thing. But like Mongoose is always kind of, just to, pat my coworkers on the back, they're always trying to keep up on these sorts of things with technology advancing and the compliance issues advancing. So, because it does change from year to year. I want to talk about consent because you mentioned you don't legally have to get consent. It's obviously a best practice to get consent. Our support specialist, John Caruso, had this line, and I love it. If you're texting students, you've made an investment to text them. Therefore, you want those texts to be received by someone. You don't want them opting out. You don't want carrier violations. So it's important to get that consent. Mike, let's talk about like consent and comfortable ways to get that started, that process started of gaining consent from students.
Yeah, so any type of form is good. And by the way, we should take a step back too. In terms of the technical legality, there are FCC statutes that give nonprofit organizations a lot of leeway in terms of what you can text, when you can text, et cetera. With that said, we'd still recommend that whoever you're texting, whether it be prospective students, current students, parents, alumni, faculty, staff, really across the board, that there is some mechanism for them to opt in. Might be as simple as a Google form, might be as simple as them maintaining that information in a self-service environment in their student information system in some type of portal. Some institutions I've seen at welcome weekends will have tables up for different offices, different areas of campus, and they'll say text in advising to 410-704-2932, and you will opt into texting that way. So lots of different ways to do it. I think that's one of the benefits of using a texting platform too, is there's some flexibility there. It's not just all driven by a CRM. You can do them in a decentralized or centralized manner, depending on your institution.
And I'm queuing up questions again. If you have them ready. Jessica, just put a message in the chat for you all to read, but also because texting is just not one size fits all. You could be a texting alumni, you could be an advancement, you could be texting prospective students, current students, and all, the ways to get consent and the ways, the things to mention all differ from institution and from department to department.
And one of the things we should talk about too, since we're talking about different audiences, is again, from a legal standpoint, once an institution obtains express consent, you're probably good. And again, check with your general counsel, but from an ethical perspective, we would recommend double checking, right? So your seniors that are graduating at senior week, don't just assume you can text them about contact verification, or text them about annual giving. Make sure that there's another mechanism to say, hey, thank you for your, 2, 4, et cetera, years here. Do you mind if we text you about X, Y, Z? You should always follow up with them as a best practice.
So like, just along that line, say someone's watching this webinar, like Jeeper Creepers, we're not getting consent. Like, would you consider that a good way to do that? Like with the verbiage that you just used?
Absolutely. You should call out why somebody would receive a text and a frequency if you can help it as well. And I would say, again, this is Mike Kochczynski speaking, not necessarily Mongoose or your institution's legal counsel, but I would say that anything that deals with the persistence of the student, them moving from one semester to the next, retaining the student, academic advising, those sorts of things, financial aid, probably should be some type of umbrella opt-in where students automatically opted in upon matriculation into the institution. Things that I love, like the rah-rah school spirit stuff, your mascots giving out donuts in the dining hall, that kind of stuff.
Mike would have opted into texting for like the lacrosse team,
everything.
even though he didn't play for the lacrosse
Absolutely.
team. Let's see what the lacrosse team's up to. So
the Gatorade making seminars, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, and students who are like me, who would have, you know, been in student government, super involved, Ferris Bueller-esque, probably dorkier, they would, you know, they are going to opt into those things, and they should have the power to do that. And the students who don't want that should be able to opt out.
Much like the beginning of this webinar, things can go awry.
Sure.
Luckily, your friends at Mongoose had gifts for you. One of the things we wanted to talk about was the important way to start. You are going to text students, even if you are texting students, before you hit send on a text, or before the next time you hit send on the text, it's develop a text messaging policy. We can't stress how important that is. If you have different departments texting different, you know, students, it's very important. Things as simple as like opt-outs. When a student opts out of one department, they might not be opting out of all the departments. Like, you want that to happen. You want to have a policy in order to make sure that you're, you know, using your tools correctly. We have a generic text messaging policy available to you. Jessica Astonish is going to put it up in the chat. It's just a link that goes directly to this generic document. I'll even show it to you if I can't show it to you. That's okay. We're fine. But you're going to see the link. It's just a link to a text messaging policy PDF. It's very generic. So obviously, there are things about your school that are, you know, going to have to be altered for this document, but it's a really good roadmap, Mike, would you say, for a policy?
Yeah, and we built it with input from a number of different types of institutions. We thought it was really important that we didn't just have flagship state institutions or liberal arts institutions or just 4-year or just 2-year. Really tried to get a sample, and it's basically going to cover, you know, who's allowed to text, who should be receiving text, what the use cases are, and then basically how you track all this. And to Greg's point too, some institutions say our texting is global. I would recommend against that, because you might have students commuting in who don't need to know anything about housing, and vice versa. Students who are, you know, residing on campus, who need to know about the situation in the residence halls and when they have to move out, when they're allowed to move in, those sorts of things. So I'd recommend that you have an overarching policy that is global in terms of best practices. There's an institution I work with who says no emojis. Okay, that's your culture. Do it. But, you know, you should be able to, you know, tell different offices, these are generally the guidelines we like to see in terms of language and behavior from staff if they're texting students, parents, alumni, etc. And, you know, basically let your teams do what you do.
Just to fight for emojis for a second. Emojis, super effective. They don't set off any alarms. They don't. Yeah, emojis are great. Emojis are great. It is 7,000 degrees in this room, especially with this motor sitting next to me. Thank you for your questions. We're almost to the point where we're going to start answering them, so keep them coming. Super happy that you all are here, and I can see your beautiful faces and your questions are coming in. This is going to be fun. We do want to talk about collecting opt-ins, and there's really 4 main things you need to do when you're collecting opt-ins from a student. When you've decided how you're going to do that, there's really 4 things you have to tell the student or let them know about. You want to let them know what kinds of texts they are going to get, informational texts that are going to help them, you know, go through their cycle. You want to provide indication of how often you plan on texting them. Set that expectation right away. That way, when they're opting in, they'll know, okay, I'm getting these texts every single week, but I agree to that. I know that expectation. If they're not ready for that, then you're going to have more opt-outs. So set that indication right off the bat, how often you're going to text students. That doesn't include like back and forth conversations, but just general informational text. Provide a place to collect a valid phone number, because if you're texting an invalid phone number, your text is just going off into nowhere. And also track when the opt-in was collected, date and time, if possible, Mike. Absolutely. Did I get, was it 4? Would there be 5?
And I would say you're borderline in the world of express written consent, where, you know, regardless if you're a for-profit institution, non-for-profit, you're probably in a space where you've met all the regulatory guidelines from the FCC at that point, if you're capturing all that information. Most institutions don't get to that level. Leave it up to them. Most will just go with express consent, where there's a name and a number on some type of form or verbal. But yeah, I think that's going above and beyond, and we would encourage that if you can do it.
Real quick to our audience, give me a wave if the link for the texting policy did go through. Give me a thumbs up if that did work. So that's good. Awesome. I just wanted to make sure that if not, if you're watching this and you didn't get that link, If you're on, this isn't for you, this is for the people watching this. They could be watching it 4 years from now, who knows? Send us a message, greg@mongooseresearch.com. We'll email that to you.
This will all be in the metaverse in 4 years.
That's right. I can't wait till Venus watches this community chat. The higher ed community in Venus is going to really take off. Let's bring things down a little bit. Talk about opt-outs. Super sad, but you know what? You got to give students their freedom. Let's talk about handling that delicate situation with student opt-outs. It's imperative that you consider, not consider, but give students the option to opting out of text as well.
Yeah, you're educating adults, you're meeting students where they are. There will be some people who, again, want to know everything. There will be some students who say, I want to know the minimum that gets me through the institution. And then there will be students who say, you know what, don't text me. And actually, if we think about things from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective too, there might be people who just don't have, unlimited texting on their plans, and you're costing them money every time you send them a text. So it's completely valid for them to say, you know what, I'd rather you not text me. I'd rather, do this via email. And you should meet your students where you are. That's the whole point of working in this industry, is serving people where they are and helping them, grow to the place where they can grow.
So you can just send a student a text that says, the school? And that constitutes opt-out language, right? Like you just send them a text, hey, is it cool if I text you?
So it's interesting. From a legality perspective, probably there was a Supreme Court case in 2018, FCC.
Way he talks about the Supreme Court rulings of different years.
So ACA International versus FCC 2018 held that organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, et cetera, are allowed to do what's called safe harbor. So you're allowed to do a safe harbor communication. You're allowed to say, hey, Mike, is it okay if I text you? Mike Kochczynski, personally, in my opinion, I think you're kind of cheating there, because you're using the medium to ask for permission to use the medium. I would prefer you probably do that again through some type of some type of portal, some type of meeting, some type of a paper form if you do that, or email as well.
The first text you send students, would you recommend having, if you don't want to receive these, click stop, unsubscribe, those kinds of things?
You could do that. We found that including opt-out language is a double-edged sword. It's certainly good for students who want to opt out. But as we know, and I can probably see from the reactions on people's faces, if you tell students how not to engage with you, they will run with that opportunity as well. So you have to kind of finesse that and figure it out. I think what you said, Greg, where you said, hey, if you don't want to receive those texts, just let us know. Probably the best way to do that initial one.
All right, cool. So it is legal to text students, but I think what is important, and this isn't really legalities, it's really best practices. And we're not going to dive into the weeds of all the best practices. Mike and I would do that any day with any of you. We only have so much time on the webinar. So again, we're going to put our information on there for you to send us emails if you have questions and stuff like that. But we do want to make it clear that you need to respect the student space. Think of your own personal phone and think about like what you want received on your phone. So let's talk about like giving students space and respecting their space.
Absolutely. So, to your point, your phone is almost an extension of you, what you search, what you're looking at, all that. It's there on the device that you carry with you almost, 365, nearly 24/7, right? So, you want to be very careful about that. And there's an attorney we've talked to, Adam Bowser, works at a law firm called Arndt Fox out of DC. And he always talks about the text should delight and should not be a surprise to the people receiving that. And I think that's a good idea to kind of work off of that. Now, of course, we'll, every student know that you're going to text them about registration on, March the 15th at 3 p.m. No, but, an average person should have kind of a general sense that I might be hearing about this topic at this time.
Very cool. So that was great. We ran through it. It might have even been quickly, but you'll get a recording of this if you mix something. But we do want to give time for questions and answers because we did see a lot of them come in. Jessica, I'm going to go to the chat and look for questions. If there's a better way to do that, let me know. So because this is kind of new, we're kind of feeling out the new form of doing this community discussion that we're doing. So thank you for your patience, viewers, on being here today. So I think, oh yeah, go ahead, Jessica.
So I reached out, I asked for anybody if they're interested in hopping on live to ask their questions. Some of them asked if I could just ask on their behalf. So I already have them pulled up so you don't have to do any searching. We can
That
kick it
voice
off.
you hear is Jessica Stonish, our great coworker that we love very
And
much.
as a quick aside, I'm sorry, I'm from the glass capital of the world, Toledo, Ohio. So seeing all the Toledoans just like makes me so happy. So that's phenomenal.
All right, so go ahead, Jessica. If you have the questions, fire away.
All right, so Brenda asked early on, what if you don't have two-way texting? So we have a lot of people who are joining us today. You know, some people are limited to texting in a CRM. Some people have a two-way texting feature. Some people only have an emergency texting platform. Do they just need to email them? What would you recommend for consent for people who aren't using a two-way texting platform?
Oh, great question. I think it's important that you use the medium for its intended purpose, right? So if you're using an emergency texting system, it's probably a short code system. It's probably not the best medium for broadcasting out, hey, basketball plays Gonzaga Thursday night, see you there. You know, it should be more about, you know, hey, this is on fire, or these sorts of things are happening, because that's what it was built for doing.
Be specific about what is on fire.
Yeah, right. That's true too. Very important. But yeah, it's important that you use the medium for what it's intended to. So if you are using a one-way conversation, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but just understand that your students might not be able to ask the questions in the breadth or depth that they need to. And so maybe offer them a way to do that. Maybe it's, hey, when you get this, if you have questions, call me back, or send me an email, you know, if you have any questions with this information, those sorts of things, or use this link, you know, to go somewhere to help somebody, like a web chat, something like that.
If you're using your text, if students are opting out of emergency text, that's bad, because then they won't be notified in the case of something that's very urgent. So
Exactly.
that's good to know. Jess, another question queued up.
Sure. So we had Bonnie ask, if a student fills out an application and provides a cell phone, is that implied consent, or does a student have to specifically check an opt-in box?
So from my perspective, that would meet the criteria of express consent. So you'd probably be okay there. To our point earlier about sending that first text, you might text them, you know, around their application. You might say, hey, we have your information. We want to text you about events and your application status. Please let us know if that's not okay. And that'd probably be a good way to just make sure everything is good to go.
Awesome. We have time for lots more questions.
Yeah,
so
please.
Hopefully they keep coming in. And Jessica, I believe, is going to give us another question.
Yep, we got a lineup. So we had this come through a couple times. What is your take on including links in text?
Links in text. So that's
Links in text.
nuanced, but we
Yes.
have answers for that. So links in text can fire off carrier violations. So a good best practice to get around links in text. If you're in a one-on-one conversation with a student, that's usually not a problem at all. If you're sending out a text to 4,000 students and you include a link, there's a chance that that might get flagged and your text won't get sent. So that can be tricky. One of the best ways to get around that, and we always, I know we are a texting platform company at Mongoose, but we always encourage omni-channel approach, use email, use things that are working, send the link in an email and give a text saying, hey, check your inbox. I just sent you a link to this. That's a very good way to get around any problems you might have. So is that
Yeah,
did that cover it?
I think that's true. You can also ask if people do want to receive a link. So Mike, you know, we have this information for you about this event, you know, may I send you a link? Yes. Okay, great. Here's the link. Doing those sorts of things makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of speculation out there that, you know, sending a link in your first text will get you flagged with the carriers. There's not a ton of data to support that. What tends to be the correlation is blasting out that text to a massive population, making it look as if it was broadcast out to a bunch of people, not personalizing the message, using a shortened link instead of a full link. So it should always be, you know, mongoose.edu/application/fall22. If you can do that rather than doing some type of a bit.ly or link shortener too.
And Annie, just because it was a follow-up question that just caught my eye before we get to the next one, using links like google.com and stuff like that, that's still a link. So I think everything we said would still apply to, you know, no matter what link you're sending, it's always good to, you know, ask questions first. Asking questions is so good for engagement. Like every question you send to a student initially should ask, is there anything I can do to help you with? Or do you understand this? So asking questions is so good for engagement. You're only going to help students more. So that's a best practice, not a legality. That's not for this webinar, but that's called bonus material, folks.
Value added.
That's right. Jess, we have another question coming up.
Yeah, we have a couple extras on links and specifics, but I think that we can maybe get into those after the event, reach out to people individually.
Okay.
So for people who are using text communications, how would you recommend they communicate to their legal team that this practice is okay to do and a great idea? I mean, there's tons of data around, you know, how successful texting is in reaching students and alumni. But what else can we say to that?
Oh, well, show them this webinar, first of all. Mongooseresearch.com. We have tons of blogs, white papers, case studies on the effectiveness of texting and also the ways to stay compliant. Schools love compliance. We love compliance. There's absolutely no danger in doing it if you do these best practices. So that would be my advice. Go to mongooseresearch.com, but I'm sure Mike has other thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's important to know your, your local rules, your local statutes, your laws, right? Because different states might have different, barriers to entry on that. But, I would frame it as, what is the use case, right? So are we texting people to remind them to give to the annual fund? That might be okay. Are we texting people to remind them to register for the next semester? Is this to make sure students complete their application? So hopefully we can enroll more students or perhaps be more selective, to really talk about the use case and where it matters. From there, if you want to reach out to me personally, I can give you some of the lines in the actual TCPA law and the statutes that have followed it, that sort of give better guidelines in terms of what's telemarketing, what's informational, et cetera. But I would start with there. And frankly, there are institutions I work with who have an extremely high risk tolerance, who say, you know what, our students sign all these waivers, and if they, have a problem with it, good luck. And I have institutions on the other extreme who say, we're not using any technology until the mothership in our state system is using it and has approved it. So, you have to understand, what the lay of the land is at your institution. And at some schools, legal might just say no and not feel comfortable. And that's kind of the way it is. But we will certainly give you as much content as we possibly can, help you make that advocacy.
I love the positive reinforcement people are giving in the chat on the email trick to sending links. And he did specify she meant using parentheses around .com instead of sending the actual link.
Oh.
I think that's like a great pass through, as long as that's simple. So like Mongoose, DOTCOM, like mongooseresearch.com, like spelling it out, doesn't give the actual link, but students can figure it out. So I don't see a problem with that. I guess give it a try, and it should work. And other institutions saying they send links all the time and there's no problem. Like, that's kind of what Mike said. You just want to do best practices to make sure it's compliant. Things are so different in every situation. So there's no one hard and fast rule about sending links, but you do want to, I guess, not the Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of shots you don't take. We want the high dual roofs free throw percentage, which is 99.9. Like, we want every text we send to be effective. So I say do the best practices for the best chance at that. Another question, Jess?
Yep. So can we talk a little bit about the difference in legalities when texting prospective students upon initial inquiry, before enrollment, and for promotional purposes?
Mike made a noise, so I'm going to let him field this.
Yes. So it's important that when we say things like enrollment or promotional, I hate sounding like a consultant here and saying, well, it depends, but we need to really define, well, what does promotional mean? Does promotional mean telling people about events? Does it mean reminding people to complete applications? So I'd recommend calling that out very specifically in use cases. What are these texts going to be? For the most part, and again, talk to, make sure you understand the rules at a state level, or if you're in Canada, to the great north, what the rules are in your area. But for the most part, again, when a student puts their name on a form and puts their valid mobile number there, they have met the criteria of express consent. If you want to go above and beyond and call out the frequency, the use cases, etc., that's not a bad idea. That would be probably a closer line to express written consent, having them check a box as well. Not necessarily a bad idea, but the beauty, but also the tricky part of this is, technically the institution has consent the moment that student provides consent. What you want to make sure is that the student knows they're going to get a text. So if a student fills out an application online, whatever CRM or information system you're using for that, great, probably doing it digitally. they check that box, they enroll at the institution, they show up at orientation, they should know that, hey, you're going to be receiving text about registration or about academic advisor appointments or about XYZ. It should be very clear to them that like this is the next step, and they should have an ability to opt out of that if they want. Now that could be in the platform themselves. So you could say, hey, we're texting you here, reply stop. It could be giving them a series of forms, whether that be in paper or digitally, telling them, hey, we're going to text you about these things, check the boxes for what you want. Could be self-service, like an information system portal, perhaps. So there's lots of different ways you could do it, but you want to make sure you're very clearly defining what those use cases are and why you're doing it.
We are going to answer your question one way or another, whether it's on this webinar or afterwards. So I really love the questions. I appreciate it. And we're good on time at this point. I just want to let you know if you're joining us late, if you want to jump on video and ask a question, put it in the chat now and Jess will bring that to our attention. We'll bump you up in the line because you were so brave in doing so. But that's up to you. It's totally up to you. We're a higher ed community. So we wanted to make this a little bit different and to give you the opportunity to do that. Until that time, Jess has another question that she's going to bring us.
Yeah, so we've had some questions on if there are link problems or if a text is flagged, how does an institution get notified and what do you do about it?
So within the Cadence platform, there are notices that tell you if a message wasn't delivered. If you are shopping for a texting platform, that should be one of the things you make sure is there. You should know if your texts are compliant or not. If you are, angering one of the, mercurial carriers out there and frustrating them with your texting, like you should know that, so you can make adjustments. So whatever platform tool you're using, that should be a requirement that a message wasn't going through. And then from there, usually you can start to make some inferences based on patterns, right? So we find that if you personalize the message, hi, Mike, hi, Greg, if there is identification there, if you use the institution's name, if there's a purpose, if there's a very clear call to action, all those things help. Again, if you are going to send links, try to send a full link as opposed to a bit.ly or some type of shortened link. All those things, again, should help as well.
We've had institutions we've talked to that weren't using Cadence, that they had an orientation that they texted like 3,000 students at and no one showed up. And it's because they did not know that did not go through. So that is definitely something when you're shopping for to look at. Very cool. Very cool. Jess, what about the next question?
So we have a lot of people who are texting many entities at large, diverse universities. How do you recommend, and I know that we've talked about this before, but can we touch on segmenting by, interest, by what content would resonate most with them? How do you segment?
So the guidelines in terms of language, what you're allowed to text about, those sorts of things should come at a very centralized level. In terms of the use cases, when you're going to reach out, those particular topics should be decentralized, should be more at a departmental unit team level. What I would say is that every team, department, unit, et cetera, they should probably, as much as you possibly can, have unique data, right? So if we think about housing, you probably want to know what residence hall someone's in, how many credits, right? So if they're in first year housing versus upperclassmen housing. We should know vaccine information potentially. We should know, depending on the institution, if you're assigning, wings by gender, those sorts of things, we might want to know gender identity. So athletics, totally different, right? Athletics might want to know height, weight, position, where they went to high school. Admissions, probably not height and weight, but they want to know, high school potentially. Well, SAT is kind of passe now, but they might want to know particular test scores or high school GPA. Whereas academic advising says, you know what, we're less concerned about who the student was as a high school student. We're concerned about who they are now, and what is their GPA here? How many credits do they have? What's their anticipated graduation date? When's their entry term? Those sorts of things. So from there, using that data, you can segment to make sure that only the sophomores are getting text about sophomore registration, and only the juniors are getting text about this thing, and seniors are getting the text about senior week and caps and gowns, et cetera. So that's how I would do it, is I would decentralize the data.
Can I put you on the spot?
Please.
So you have the text being sent to different segments. What about the data? And this is a legalities texting. So if athletics is texting a group of students and the information you have in your CRM is important in knowing like that they're sophomores, juniors, and all of that. And now financial aid wants that information, or a different department. You have an enterprise texting solution. So you're texting different departments. What about cross data sharing through different departments?
Great question.
That's a good, did you hear that? That's a good question.
So it depends on the institution, right? So some things might be hyper centralized in like a Banner, Workday, potentially a CRM like Salesforce, et cetera, and that's fine. At some institutions, you might have housing in Adirondack or housing in, I don't know, I'm trying to think of all the different housing tools, or athletics is in Front Rusher Arms. So you probably want to have a system that can accommodate either, depending on your resources on the IT side and integrations. It would be amazing to have a centralized integration where every department's pulling from a particular list and based on particular data and a particular report that's spit out by a particular information system. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. Banner probably doesn't have, that somebody's a 6'8" power forward from, Alabama, right? Whereas Front Rush probably does. So whatever that situation might be, you want to make sure that it's decentralized when it needs to be decentralized, centralized for the things that should be centralized.
Cool. All right, we're still rolling with the questions, so keep them coming in. We're doing great. Love the higher ed backgrounds. I see Binghamton University represented there with their mascot. Some campus action going on. This is awesome. Thank you for sharing those with us. Jess, we got another question coming up.
Yep, we're going to start wrapping it up. So we're going to have two more questions. So we had a couple were the same. So when communicating with alumni, different. So is there anything that's different from when texting with prospective students or current students? Are there the same rules of connection that allow contact via Pantheon governed texting? The other question is, if you are connecting with alumni and you've had their number for forever, what do you do about consent that way? Is it just implied consent because you've had their phone number since they were a student, or what's the best course of action there?
Okay, I think phone-a-thon, because I was like, phone-a-thon. I was thinking in my head, I was like, that doesn't make sense. So what most institutions tend to do is they have a calling program. They call Mr. Bauch and they get talking about whatever. And Greg, can I text you a link so you can play your gift tonight? And
no.
Greg might say yes, no, whatever. And that text goes out that evening. You can certainly do that. And I think you can do that for any of your alumni, regardless of age group and how long you've had that number. For the alumni that have been around the block for a while, if you've had a texting program, you've texted them a while, you're probably okay to do that. Maybe periodically send them a text saying, hey, is this still the best information? Is this still the best medium for you? It's very interesting. Most people, when they think texting, they think, oh, Gen Z, all our young alumni. The class of the cohort of 1970, 1979 actually has the highest response rate amongst alumni. For texting. So, baby boomers, frankly, we're talking about here. Not necessarily, Gen X, millennials, or Gen Z. So very interesting.
Cool. I guess we have time for one more question. But again, your questions will be answered promptly after. We just have a time constraint on our webinar. So Jess, go ahead and fire away the last question.
So if a school is using both short code and one-to-one texting to communicate with prospective students, does that require two separate opt-ins, or is one for both sufficient?
Yes.
I would think both would be, or you'd be sufficient with both.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, that depends on the institution, I believe. Maybe,
yes. Well, it depends potentially on the state and the medium, but
where the institution
I would think, I think you would be okay.
Okay. All right.
I did see one about emojis.
Yes.
I love
What's the website?
Emojipedia is the best website. It tells you all the hidden meanings for the emojis, so you can make sure you are not sending something inappropriate on accident, to your students, etc. But Emojipedia tells you all the hidden meanings and what it's going to look like on phones. I think it's the best website.
Thank you so much. Oh,
sorry,
go ahead, Jess.
Real quick. The question was, do you have a guide on what emojis not to use with Gen Z? And I think we're going to make a guide.
Yes, that's smart. I love
so
that.
Thank you, Jen, for asking that question. I think that's
thank
a guide
you, Scott, for sharing the website.
Yes.
That we're going to, that's a really fun guide to create. So that's something we'll put together for you guys.
Awesome. Thank you for your patience in getting through the beginning. We had some hiccups. Hopefully you like this new format. We loved it. We love talking higher ed. Mike and I are always available for questions. And if you've listened to us, you know you're going to send your question to Mike because he's smarter. Mike@mongooseresearch.com is Mike's email. I'm Greg at mongooseresearch.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much for being here. The recording will come to you, if not today, then first thing tomorrow. So I hope you all like the new format. And thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it from everyone here, from Jess and everyone here at Mongoose. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.